This is lecture video 405 through 416, the start of the Civil War. The North mobilizes following the fall of Fort Sumter, as we talked about in class last time, and on the last lecture video, Lincoln mobilizes state militias. And as soon as he does that, instead of complying with that order, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee secede from the Union. And so we have what is considered the Confederate States, or the Confederacy. The general belief is the war would be over very quickly. Both sides believe that their side's going to win, which is interesting. But the North pushes forward, the South pushes forward, each setting up their own governments and both getting ready, mobilizing their military to fight this war. War fever led many to volunteer for service in the beginning. This war's going to be awesome. It's going to be over quick. We need to get involved in it now. But it will eventually slow way down, and the enthusiasm that initially is there fades away, leading both sides to have to draft men for military service. Half of the military men in the North of eligible age fought. They're also supplemented with African Americans and Irish immigrants, whereas in the South, 90% of all eligible people to fight serve. They keep dropping the minimum age requirements and the old age requirements, the upper part of the age requirements. And so the North way outnumbers the South as far as men who actually fight in the war, but imagine if they would have used all of their soldiers. So just interesting. At the beginning of the war, North controls 90% of the nation's industrial capacity, and that just keeps growing and growing and growing. It was 85% the last lecture video we talked about. And the Northern Railroad system is twice that of the South. The South keeps building railroads. The South starts to build more factories, but the North just keeps building more and more and more and more. And the North had more abundant financial resources than the South. We know that. The South is a loose association of a bunch of rich plantation owners, whereas the North has the banking, the factories, everything that helps them have a lot more money than the South does. Jefferson Davis had to build a government from scratch. He will use the North or the United States as his the basis. He's not going to try to reinvent the wheel, but he's got to organize his whole thing. He's not a very good leader either. He's elected into office, but he's an aloof kind of guy. Kind of, hard to pin him down on certain things. He's uncompromising as well. And so it's the definition of the number one definition of being a leader. What makes you a good leader is that there are people following you. And people follow Jefferson Davis, but I don't know if he was the best person to be the president of the Confederacy. Lincoln and other Northern leaders knew this war might take a long time. And so the whole idea of the prolonged sacrifice of the war by the importance of preserving the Union. The South is completely fine with just taking the slave states and becoming the Confederate States of America, and the Union or the United States can be in the northern part and the western part, and they're good with that. But that doesn't ever creep into Lincoln's head. Lincoln is, we're going to preserve the Union. We're going to bring this back together. We're going to bring the United States back together. He is a much better politician. He's more personable than Jefferson Davis is. Does he make his mistakes? Sure. But he's able to connect with people. He can handle disagreements. He's super simple. He's country from Illinois, but he's also eloquent. He's very well read, very well educated, and he's got great personal skills. A lot of things, the disagreements that Jefferson Davis has that he can't get through and get by are not a problem for Lincoln. Lincoln adopts, as we talked about before, a soft strategy to keep the border states in the Union. Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky never joined the Confederacy, and neither does Missouri. But that's more where a lot of fighting for what is Missouri going to be happens. They call it guerrilla warfare, but it's kind of choose where you want to go. Um, and another interesting thing is that the people in the north west part of Virginia, the western side of the Appalachian Mountains, and including up to the Appalachian Mountains, they go to Lincoln. They send a delegation to Lincoln and say, "We don't want to be a part of the Confederacy. We don't have slaves. We don't want slaves. We don't need slaves. We want to be a part of the United States. We don't want to join the Confederacy." So they appeal to Lincoln to become a state, and Lincoln grants that, and Virginia loses about a third of its total land area um, by West Virginia becoming a state, the 33rd state in the United States, the only state to become a state during the Civil War. Okay, so it's kind of crazy that Virginia not only has to come back into the Union, pledge their allegiance to the United States, but then they also have to accept the fact that they've lost one third of their state, which is crazy to think about. But what was one of the larger states now has been cut down in size dramatically. But West Virginia does become a state during the Civil War. The Southern landscape plays a significant role in the strategies of the Civil War. There's Northern leaders have issues with it. Dense forests, uneven terrain, humidity, hamper the traditional line up at each other and shoot those battle tactics. It also exhausts the troops. But because of the Norse Railroad, because of the Norse Telegraph, it would enable them to transcend these environmental barriers. And they're able to stay ahead or stay a course of the South. Okay. As far as militarily goes, the South has way better leaders. Remember, all of the generals, all of the leaders of the Confederacy and of the Union all went to West Point together. But majority of the Confederate leaders were at the top of their class, whereas the Union leaders were not. So they do have better leaders militarily than the Union does. All right, so the early years of war, the first battle is going to be at Bull Run, Manassas, Virginia, called the Battle of Bull Run because of Bull Run Creek. And the Union forces show up there under McDowell, and the Confederate soldiers end up there under Beauregard. And the first battle changes a lot of different things. Lincoln's there, and so are a bunch of picnickers. They bring their picnic baskets to watch this splendid little battle that's going to happen because everybody thinks the war's going to be over nice and quick. Well, it's not over very quickly. They're set in for a long war. The South gained some confidence because the North they actually win the first Battle of Bull Run. Lincoln gets his hat shot off the top of his head at the first Battle of Bull Run. He will not come back to another battlefield 6 or 8 inches lower, and instead of knocking the hat off his head, it hits him in the head and he dies, and the Civil War might have ended right there, then and there. But this boost the South gets is huge. So here is the map of where the Battle of Bull Run took place in its proximity to Washington, D.C., which is just crazy. Only 12 miles away from Washington, D.C. Now, as we move away from the main armies fighting, we move westward. And the whole plan of the United States is they're going to blockade the eastern seaboard of the United States. And then they're going to send Grant in a westward fashion, work along Tennessee all the way over here. And he is going to follow this path here, just like this. Other forces are over here fighting, but the whole idea, it's called the Anaconda Plan. And we have blockaded over here on the eastern seaboard and blockaded Florida. We then send Admiral Farragut up, and we fight the Battle of New Orleans. And New Orleans is a super important battle to win because now we control the exit of the Mississippi River. And if we can control the exit of the Mississippi River, now we stop all their transportation out of New Orleans. So they can still use the Mississippi, but they can't get it out through New Orleans. Okay, so Admiral Farragut's going to win the Battle of New Orleans in April 1825. Grant is going to slow April 25th, 1862. Excuse me. Grant is going to win here at Fort Donelson. Fort Henry, Fort Donelson, move down here, win at Memphis, which at Shiloh, and then win at Memphis. Now, the South's response as they see Grant moving at Fort Henry and Donelson is that they send troops up from Mobile. That's Braxton Bragg. They send Beauregard, who has been removed from the main army in Virginia, up through Mississippi, up to meet in fight in a battle. And also Johnson is going to swoop in from Nashville, and they're all going to meet at Shiloh. And Shiloh is a huge battle. It's the bloodiest battle in the Civil War up until this point, which Grant will win. Beauregard makes some brutal decisions, but that Grant will win. Grant will then move to Memphis, and he'll win Memphis June 6th, 1862. Now, it takes him almost a year for Grant to hook up in Vicksburg, the last stronghold of the South on the Mississippi. But it will take him almost a year to get from Memphis down to Vicksburg to meet up with Admiral Farragut, where they're going to surround Vicksburg. Okay, and that's going to be a super important battle, but that's not going to happen until 1863. Okay, so the whole Anaconda plan is we're going to cut off Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas by taking the Mississippi River, and then we're going to start to slowly move our way this way, or constrict, like a snake, like an anaconda, restrict the South. We've already blocked off the eastern seaboard, and we're going to move in all these directions and come down on the South. Here is a picture of a Union soldier being prepared by a surgeon to have his leg amputated in a field hospital. And this is where we'll pick up on our next reading.